Women and children first. We've all heard it. The noble standard of men sacrificing themselves for the helpless. It's the ultimate act of chivalry. Proof that men are the protectors and women, well, we should be grateful, right? I saw this tweet the other day that kind of illustrated this story. And the undertone of the tweet, well, you can judge for yourself. Imagine that fateful day or night when your ship, the ship that everyone said was unsinkable, is sinking. The Titanic on its maiden voyage. Men are all standing aside, waiting patiently for women and children to get on the lifeboats first. Doesn't matter what class. In this moment, wealth and status doesn't matter. It's all about protecting women and, of course, the most vulnerable on the boat, children. This is just the way it's done. Standard. All boating incidents end up this way. Right? Right? Before women had equal rights to men, we're told often on the internet that we had it so much better. They were a protected class. Men understood this, even at critical moments when their own safety was at risk, like a sinking ship. In fact, these critical moments, it's when the protectors actually showed themselves, not just opening a door for someone, which I often do on a regular basis for all genders and ages. No, anyone with some decency would do that. The moment when chivalry shows up is a moment when your own safety is at risk. What if I told you that the women and children first standard is mostly a myth? And what if I told you that feminism didn't actually kill this type of chivalry, because real, selfless chivalry was never the norm to begin with? So let's break it down. But first, hi, my name's Elizabeth. If you're new, I had a baby 4 months ago, and so this is my first video back. It's been a wild ride, okay? I'm just starting to feel like I have a moment to think of other things other than my sweet daughter. She's sleeping right now. New parent, that's a whole topic. That's a whole other topic. But why am I doing this topic specifically today? It's because I hate women. Is it because I hate men? No and no. Am I trying to shame either gender? Absolutely not. Throughout my time on the internet, I have been accused of being anti-Semitic, racist, a pygmy, a feminist, a typical woman you need to watch out for. It's the internet. It's to be expected. People want you to adhere to their most controversial ideas. Otherwise, you are a problem. No matter how reasonable my take sounds to the normal person out there, no matter how diplomatic I try to phrase my arguments, there's always someone upset because I'm not following along their extremism. I still feel the need to say things though. The reason I'm making this video is because I hate, there's something deep in my soul that deeply dislikes when lies and myths are used against a group of people or to drive a narrative. For example, the 50% of marriages end in divorce myth. Yes, it's a myth. I addressed this in another video. Or the women are more emotional and men are more logical lie. Yes, it's also a lie. I made a video about that. There's no facts behind that statement. And not to mention that I also defended emotions, because it's often said as if logic is the superior word or side of this equation, which it isn't, because without emotion, guys, we wouldn't be able to make any decisions at all. We wouldn't be able to get out of bed in the morning. Regardless, today there's another one I want to tackle. This idea that it used to be the case that men willingly gave themselves up for women, strangers, complete strangers, up until the point that feminism came along and gave women equal rights and just ruined all of that. So let's get into it. All right, let's start with the Titanic, the holy grail of men sacrificing themselves for women. And trust me, I watched the movie. I believe this as well. When I found this out, I was actually shocked. Yes, 74% of women survived and only 20% of men did. Now, with the women and children first principle, it should be 100% of women, right? I actually don't have the number for children. I should. Hopefully I can find it and add it in the editing space. So it should be 100% of women, right? Well, of course, there would be women that wouldn't want to leave their husbands, their brothers, their fathers, whatever. However, in this case, in the Titanic, the standard was applied. The standard that we believe was the default in shipwrecks. It turns out, however, that it is not that simple. Men were not willingly giving spots away. They were being forced to. You see, chivalry comes from the medieval knightly code of conduct, which emphasized bravery, honor, and courtesy. This does not come naturally to all men or to all humans, for that matter. There were only some men on the boat that were acting on such principles, most notably the captain and the officers who took the women and children first very, very seriously, violently, seriously, allegedly threatening to shoot men. Most of the men on the boat had to be compelled with a gun pointed at them to not fight for their spot on the lifeboat. Another thing that often doesn't get mentioned, first class women had an almost 100% survival rate in the Titanic. Third class women, not so much. And a good chunk of the men who survived, you guessed it, they were rich. So, was this really about women and children first, or was it more about status and who had the access to lifeboats first? I would say it's a mix of both. There were some brave and honorable men on board who enforced this, but they had weapons and they were not the majority. And on the other hand, you had a way better chance of survival if you were wealthy. So the Titanic incident is most often used to illustrate the women and children first story. Why this specific incident? Why not Lusitania, for example, another one that we know about? If women and children first was a universal rule, then logically we would see a pattern on other shipwrecks, right? But we don't. A 2012 study looked at 18 maritime disasters from 1852 to 2011 and found that in most cases, even before women had equal rights, okay, women and children were less likely to survive than men. Some examples: the HMS Birkenhead in 1852, all the way back to the 19th century. This is where the whole women and children first phrase comes from. Editing me here just so that there's no confusion. I just want to clarify, the Birkenhead incident is where the protocol comes from, as I said, and all of the women and children were saved. But there are only 7 women and 13 children. This is an important example because the standard originated here, but it was hardly ever followed. I should also mention that the men on the Birkenhead were British soldiers, so following a protocol like that with discipline might have come more natural than with the general male population. The RMS Lusitania in 1915, we all know about this one, or at least if you don't know about this one, you really should. It's kind of like an important part of the 20th century history. But anyways, no one waited for the women and children to board their lifeboats first. It was total chaos. And the MV Estonia in 1994, one of the most recent examples, women had way lower survival rates than men. Why? Why is this? Because in actual disasters, pretty phrases don't matter as much as physical strength. If you have to swim, climb, or fight for a spot on the lifeboat, well, sorry, but biology isn't on our side. If I was trying to get a spot in the lifeboat for me and my daughter, I would probably not be able to get one unless by some miracle I had a lot of help. And in that case, if I had to choose between me and her, I would most definitely give her the spot. If that was even a choice, I don't know why that would be a choice, but if that was even a choice. The other reason, crew members save themselves first. This is why they tend to have the highest survival rates in shipwrecks. And the third one and most obvious reason, panic trumps politeness. Okay, so chivalry sounds really nice until you're in ice cold water fighting for your life. Now, a lot of people claim that feminism killed chivalry. Now, I have a lot of issues with feminism. Trust me, I do. I have a lot of issues with some aspects of feminism and with a lot of feminists. But I do think that there are some aspects of it that was needed. I like being able to have a voice in society. A lot of people use the women and children first Titanic scenario as proof of how men used to behave to protect women. And now we know that the Titanic situation was not only rare, but a few men on board had to threaten violence on the other men for them to follow the principle. There are still men today that open doors for women, and not just women, other people in general. And there are those that will not open it for anyone, not even a little old lady with a cane. Perhaps what I could agree to, or what one could argue, was that feminism did indeed change social expectations, or reveal those that were only doing polite and decent things because of how they might be seen by others. Because let's be real, true selfless chivalry was never the default. It was always situational, it depended on class, social expectations, and whether people were being watched. Then also selective. Historically, chivalry most applied to upper class women. Poor women, not so much. And also rare, because at the end of the day, human nature is about self-preservation. Even back in the good old days, women were not magically protected. Again, we can argue that the movement of feminism removed the social expectations of men behaving a kind of way towards women. That we can have a conversation about. We can also maybe look at how the more individualistic society becomes, the more selfish each person is, acting kind and polite only when it serves them. And again, this goes for both genders. This, of course, doesn't apply to every single person. It didn't apply to the captain of the Titanic or his officers, who in that moment did exhibit the old school chivalrous and honorable and brave characteristics. Or Daniel Penny, a more modern example, who even after he was persecuted for what he did in the New York City subway, said he would do it again if the situation presented itself. This says a lot about the character of Mr. Penny, and also it says a lot about the people on the internet who say, I would never do anything because of how the world is today. I don't believe those guys would do anything if the world was any different. There are other things aside from feminism which contributed to the fact that chivalry ceased to be so much of an expectation. Again, modern individualism. People look out for themselves now more than ever. We can argue about whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think there's positives and negatives to that. And there's class and social status. Just like in the Titanic, survival and chivalry usually favors not the bold, but the wealthy. And then there's a reality check. Men can be chivalrous today. They can be gentlemanly today. There are still men behaving with those standards in mind. I've come across men like this, but it's the exception and not the rule. Whether we're talking about the 19th century or today, they certainly are plenty of those men. And they exist, I believe, in some professions more than others. But to expect the majority of men to behave this way when there's no immediate benefit to themselves is, naive. So, is women and children first a real thing? Sometimes, but most of the time not really. Did feminism kill chivalry? Nope. Chivalry was already rare and I think maybe a selfless act, but not a universal rule. Maybe instead of romanticizing the past so much, we should just accept that people are just people. And if you're ever in a real survival situation, don't count on a random man to save you. Now, before I close out, I want to introduce a book, which I might do this once a month where I recommend a book I'm reading. I don't know, but currently I'm reading Dissolving Illusions. Joe Rogan just interviewed the author of this book, but I was reading it before she was interviewed there, by the way. It is absolutely blowing my mind. It does have to do with all the V mandates all the way back to the 19th century, even to the 18th century. I honestly had no idea how awful, how absolutely awful things used to be when it came to the V mandates, how forceful they were. It is easily one of the most fascinating books I have read in a while. I really recommend. I'm going to put the link in the description. So, all right, what do you guys think? Do you think you meet these standards of chivalry, honor, and bravery, like the honorable code of soldiers, of knights? Have we all been sold a lie about chivalry and the women and children first myth? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe and like, because clearly I'm sacrificing myself, my time, to keep you all informed. Cheers, and see you next time.